Hello my friends, in this video we will be taking a look at the autosomal DNA predicted phenotype traits and GT match results of a Mesolithic period hunter-gatherer, a Western hunter-gatherer from Spain, La Braña individual from this region right here in northwestern Spain. La Braña 1, I have made a video on La Braña 2, I want you to check it out, it's on my channel as well, I uploaded it I think 2 days ago, so this is La Braña 1. Also from the same period. This individual lived, let's see the time period this individual lived in. I think it's the Mesolithic, but let's see the time period. It is 59 to 57 centuries before the Common Era, so this is the Mesolithic period. And it is a male, so it has Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA. His Y DNA is C1A, which is a haplogroup that was at one point in time very widespread in Europe. Very common in Europe at one point in time, especially in the Paleolithic period. But now it is very, very unusual for Europeans because it was replaced by the I lineages, and later it was replaced by the R1A and R1B. So it was at one point in time it was very common for Europeans to have C lineages, but now it is completely gone from European gene pool. So nowadays you're not going to see any Europeans with CY DNA, but in even in the Mesolithic, there were quite a lot of Europeans with CY lineages, and his mitochondrial lineage is actually U5B2, which is still very common for Europeans. Very typical lineage for European people even to this day. So U5, it is the same lineage as is predicted with James Lick. You can upload this DNA file to James Lick and YSEC Clade Finder. You will see the same exact result there. So I am hinting that the download link for the file will be in the description of the video. As always, the download link for the files that I analyze is always in the description of the video, so you can always, do whatever research you want with the files that I analyze on your own. But anyway, let's see what he scores with GD match. We're going to see what he scores with Uroginski 36. Very interesting results for a Western hunter-gatherer. He's scoring mostly Fennoscandia and Finnish. So despite, let me show you the location actually. So you see the location for this individual is in Iberia, it's in Spain. This individual lived in Mesolithic period in Spain, but despite living in Spain, he doesn't really look Spanish whatsoever. He looks very, very Finnish and Northeast European. He's scoring 38% Finnish, 16.5% East Central European, which is like Lithuanian. So he's scoring mostly Finnish, Lithuanian, North Atlantic, which is like French, and North Sea, which is like Swedish. So he's scoring mostly Northern and Eastern European components, and Eastern European, which is like Erzia and Moksha and like Russian. So he's scoring mostly Northeastern European components, despite being from Spain, right? So he doesn't really resemble Spanish people whatsoever, but he is from Spain. One exception to this is that he scores 9.39% Basque. So there is maybe some affinity to 9.5% Basque is significant. So there is maybe some affinity to Basques and some affinity to Western Mediterraneans, of course. And this person does have some affinity to Mediterranean groups too, but it's quite insignificant. Mostly, this individual resembles various Northeast Europeans, of course. This is a pattern you will observe with any European hunter-gatherer. They mostly resemble Northeast Europeans, and they also score a little bit of Oceanian, and they also score 0.35% West African, which is kind of very interesting. Don't really pay attention to the oracle. The oracle for Uroginski 36 is kind of broken, so don't really worry about it too much. Okay, let's see what this individual looks like. What does this person look like? Let's see for phenotype, for eye color, hair color, skin color. So for eye color, it looks like most likely they have blue eyes with an amber center ring. That's the largest group they score for eye color. The second largest group they score is hazel eyes, and the third largest they score is green eyes. They most likely don't have brown eyes or blue eyes, and they definitely don't have dark brown eyes. So this is completely off the table, but most likely they have blue eyes with an amber center ring, green or hazel eye color. Okay, kind of typical result for a Western hunter-gatherer. Most of them scored pretty much the same thing here. Blue eyes with an amber center, green or hazel. For hair color distribution, definitely has black hair, definitely very dark hair color. And for skin color likelihood distribution, most likely intermediate between light brown and olive skin tone. So between light brown and olive for the skin tone, and for hair texture, Looks like he is scoring wavy hair texture for the largest percentage, but also it is possible to have curly or straight hair as well. Kinky hair is almost completely out of the picture, and for nose shape, slightly higher odds for snub nose shape rather than for Greek, but still there is kind of like more or less evenly similar percentages for those traits. When it comes to coloring related variants, looks like 2 light color variants for all the relevant variations in HERC2. And yes, he has blue eye haplotype 3 and 2 and 1. He has all of the blue eye haplotypes in HERC2 region. He also has. He does not have any light color variants in this variation of SLC24A5, which is very interesting. So he doesn't have the light color variants in SLC24A5. Definitely has predisposition to dark color of skin, eyes, and hair. No light color variants in this variation of SLC45A2 either. So definitely darker variants or pigmentation here. And he does have one light color variant in this variation of IRF4, which is also quite typical for European hunter-gatherers to have light color variants in this variation. I noticed that as well. And he does not have any light color pigmentation variants in MC1R. Very, very interesting. Let's see what he scores with snipper free. I feel like with snipper free tools for eye color classification, he's going to score either hazel or blue. Let's see. I'm expecting hazel or blue. Probably blue. Yeah, he's scoring blue. Yeah, but snipper free doesn't take into account the SLC 24A5 genotype, does it? Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. So that's a problem. It doesn't take into account the SLC 24A5 genotype. If it did, it wouldn't be scoring blue. So, yeah, it's not very precise. It's not very good. If you look at the OCA2 and HERC2 eye color calculator, this is obviously going to be very blue because this takes, if you take into account only the OCA2 and HERC2 genotypes, obviously this person is going to have very blue eyes because they have all light color variants in all the OCA2 and HERC2 genotypes, all the OCA2 and HERC2 variations. But obviously, if you take all the other genes into account, the likelihood of blue eyes for him is very low. It's not very significant. It's only 4%. Most likely they have blue eyes with a neighbor center green or hazel. So there's definitely a lot of nuance when you consider all the other genes as well besides OCA2 and HERC2. And for hair color, definitely quite dark, quite different from modern Europeans. Modern Europeans generally don't have black hair, and for skin color, also definitely quite dark, different from modern Europeans. Modern Europeans generally don't have light brown or olive skin, so once again, definitely quite different from modern Europeans in terms of pigmentation. Let's see the phenotype oracle. What phenotypes does this individual resemble? Looks like the closest phenotypes to this individual are this phenotype, which seems to be the phenotype that shows up closest to all the Western hunter-gatherers that I've been analyzing so far. Followed by this phenotype, which also seems to be the closest phenotype that shows up to all the Western hunter-gatherers that I've been analyzing so far. Followed by this, which also shows up very close to all the Western hunter-gatherers that I analyze, including Cheddarman, Brana, all the other peoples that I make videos on. And the models for the mixtures seems like the closest model is 50% NIS plus 50% NIS. The second closest model is 50% NIS plus 50% NIS. The third closest is 50% NIS plus 50% NIS. The fourth is 50% NIS plus 50% NIS. The fifth is 50% NIS plus 50% NIS. Very, very interesting models. So maybe there's actually a little bit of a Middle Eastern admixture for the facial morphology, which is the reason he's scoring the closest mixture is a mixture of this plus this. But you see the distance is quite high though. The distance is quite high, so I'm wondering why that is. Why such a high distance for the phenotype oracles? Okay, let's see the biomarkers panel results. For the biomarkers panel, looks like he has above average level of vitamin D, really good. Above average level of LDL cholesterol, which is bad. Below average level of HDL cholesterol, which is also bad. Below average level of glucose, which is quite bad. Quite good actually. Above average level of hemoglobin, which is good. Above average blood pressure, which is bad. Below average level of iron in the blood, which is good because it means he doesn't have hemochromatosis. Yeah, I'm sorry, hemochromatosis. Yeah. Below average level of sex hormone binding globulin, which is all right. Below average level of red blood cell count in blood, which is which is I don't remember. I think it's bad. For telomere length, looks like he has predisposition to lower number of base pairs, which is bad, which is very interesting. This might be one of the might be one of the lower scores I've seen so far, and he's scoring below average for height. Very very interesting. Let's see the polygenic risk scores now. Looks like he's got a below average odds for kidney stones, very high odds for hemoglobin E disease, and he's got risk variance here and here. For migraine, he's got below average odds for migraine. For lupus, he's got slightly above average odds for lupus, slightly above average odds for gout. He's got slightly below average odds for thyroid cancer. He's got slightly above average odds for eczema. He's got slightly above average odds for exfoliation glaucoma. Let's look it up actually in this file. We should be able to find some information on that here. So yes, he's got the genotype which leads to significantly higher odds of exfoliation glaucoma, which explains the result. Looks like he's got a genotype for average odds for pigmentary glaucoma, and one risk variant here for pigmentary glaucoma. That makes sense. One genotype for average odds for open-angle glaucoma, and average odds for primary congenital glaucoma. For congenital glaucoma, he's got one risk variant for that. Okay, for open-angle glaucoma, we should be able to look that up as well. Let's look it up. Nothing shows up. Okay. So it looks like something that's not showing up in the file that contributed to this score. For PCOS, looks like he's got a slightly below average score for PCOS. For cataracts, looks like he's got a slightly above average score for cataracts. For macular degeneration, age-related AMD, he's got very above average score for that. Let's look it up actually, AMD. Let's look that up. So let's compare that result with the panel. He's got 5.2 times the average. And here on the panel, we see a genotype for increased odds, a genotype for 2.7 times increased odds, 5.9 times increased odds, a genotype for reduced odds, a genotype for reduced odds, a genotype for 3 times increased odds, and genotype for 2 times increased odds. So yeah, it makes sense. He's got a lot of risk variance for AMD, and with these types of genotypes, it makes sense why he's scoring so high for the risk of AMD. So it totally makes sense. Totally makes sense why he's scoring so high for the risk of age-related macular degeneration. He's got a lot of risk variance for that. He's got very high odds for rheumatoid arthritis. Let's look that up as well. Just really curious what we're gonna find here. He's got a genotype for 3 times increased of rheumatoid arthritis, and a genotype for, and that's it. That's actually it. All right. For Tourette's, he's got a genotype. He's got based on 6 S&P, slightly above average odds for Tourette's. For epilepsy, slightly above average odds for epilepsy. For asthma, average odds for asthma. For leukemia, slightly above average odds for leukemia. For vitiligo, slightly above average odds for vitiligo. For myopia, slightly above average odds for myopia. For corneal astigmatism, slightly above average odds for corneal astigmatism. Wow, so he has a lot of predispositions to all these conditions. He has slight predispositions to all these various conditions, which is very interesting. For primary biliary cirrhosis, he's got slightly below average odds for that. Stroke, slightly below average odds for stroke. Male pattern hair loss, slightly above average odds for, actually very significantly above average odds for male pattern hair loss, which is kind of typical for Europeans and West Eurasians in general. For atrial fibrillation, looks like he's got a below average odds for atrial fibrillation, which is really good to see. This is one of the things that he doesn't have a predisposition for, which is really good to see. Deep vein thrombosis, below average odds for that, really good to see. Depression, average odds for depression, really good to see. Bipolar type 1, below average odds for bipolar type 1, which is really good to see. Schizophrenia, slightly above average odds for schizophrenia, which is okay. Type 2 diabetes, really high odds for type 2 diabetes, which is okay. And average odds for type 1 diabetes, and very high odds for Alzheimer's, above average odds for Alzheimer's, and low odds for multiple sclerosis. All right. He's got 1 risk variant for breast cancer out of 16, which is pretty low. He's got 6 risk variants for testicular cancer out of 18, which is really low. So he's definitely quite protected from testicular cancer. He's got 2 risk variants for celiac disease out of 12, which is really low as well. No risk variants for GSS, which is really good. 2 risk variants for Crohn's out of 28, which is really good. No risk variants for Riefenstein's, no for Parkinson's, no for Gilbert syndrome, none for basal cell carcinoma or Peutz-Jeghers or hypoplasia or for Waardenburg. He's got 2 risk variants for GCD, but they're common. to risk. He's got some risk variance for allergies, 10 out of 24, but that's pretty typical. No risk variance for FHC or for congenital analgesia or for Brugada or for Cheche Collins. He's got risk variance for IBS, but they're common. He's got risk variance for Treasure Collins type 2, but they're common. He's got risk variance for Pfeiffer syndrome, but they're both common. Looks like he doesn't have any uncommon risk variance besides these for thoracic, familiar thoracic aneurysm, but this might be a miscall. I'm inclined to think this is a miscall, as well as this for myosclerosis. This probably is a miscall as well. No risk variance for Hirschsprung or Fabry or Lee-Fraumeni, so quite good, quite healthy result. Quite a healthy result. There's not much problems. There's not much problems in this result. Aside from the score for type 2 diabetes, which is a little bit concerning, type 2 diabetes score is pretty reliable here, actually. It's pretty good. And the age-related macular degeneration is really concerning as well. So he's scoring really high for type 2 diabetes and age-related macular degeneration, which is really, really concerning. But aside from that, there is not that big of a deal. And hemoglobin E disease is a little bit concerning as well. So hemoglobin E disease, age-related macular degeneration, and type 2 diabetes. All right, let's go through the result, the monogenic result, and see what he scores here. Looks like he has a predisposition to warrior phenotypes, lower dopamine reuptake, and higher dopamine levels, therefore lower stress resiliency and better attention and motivation tasks. This seems like a typical result for Western hunter-gatherers in general. Most of them score the same thing here. Most of them score warrior. I noticed that Western hunter-gatherers score mostly the same thing on this panel. It's very interesting. General trend among Western hunter-gatherers is to score warrior. There is definitely some truth behind like this racist. I don't, it's not politically correct to say, but there is some truth behind all this racist neuroscience that says that like Europeans are more warrior and have worse stress resiliency because there is some like statistical reality behind the allele distribution in these variations, where Europeans do have some predisposition to being warrior and having higher dopamine levels and lower stress resiliency. It's true. Like you can do some research and you will find the statistical reality to be true. And you can observe that with various genomes. I've observed that with various genomes I've analyzed. It looks like for DRD2 he has a predisposition to intermediate number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain, which is very interesting. It looks like he has a predisposition to no dwarfism, which is really good, and predisposition to increased risk of anxiety disorders in SLC 6A4, which is really interesting. For 5-HT and serotonin, it looks like he has a predisposition to intermediate levels of 5-HT and serotonin, so intermediate odds of such things as anxiety and depression. Quite good to see. No pathogenic variants in PRNP, which is really good to see once again. No uncommon genotypes in this relevant to insomnia or sleep disorders. Quite good to see. For autism, genotypes relevant to autism, looks like he has straight up intermediate odds of autism. So no predisposition to autism, no predisposition against autism. Quite good. For lactose persistence, looks like he does not carry the European lactose persistence mutation, doesn't carry any risk variants for European lactose persistence, but he is heterozygous in this variation of LCT, which does make him most likely lactose persistent. And the C allele here is not exclusive to Europeans, so technically if you're not a European, you can be like Baloch or Indian or East Asian, you can still be lactose persistent. You can still have the C allele, which predisposes you to be lactose persistent, and you can still have this genotype even if you aren't a European, which is like a little fun fact. So he's most likely lactose persistent based on his genotype, but it's not a European. It's not necessarily a European mutation here. I had to do a lot of research to find this variation. By the way, it's really difficult to find stuff like that. For OXTR and empathy gene, looks like he has a predisposition to higher levels of empathy. So if you take these 5 genotypes into account, he has a predisposition to higher level of empathy, which is really good to see. For diabetes, we remember he was scoring really high for type 2 and slightly below average for type 1. So he's got slightly below average odds for type 1, slightly above average odds for type 2. Not a carrier for C282I hemochromatosis mutation, which is really good to see. No risk variance for Alzheimer's and APOE, which is really good to see. For PCOS, he was scoring average, so we remember that. For multiple sclerosis, he was scoring below average for the risk of MS. No risk variance for MS and HLA gene, which is really good to see so far. So it's probably quite healthy for the HLA gene panel as well. For the risk of cardiovascular issues, he's got a predisposition to lower odds of cardiovascular issues. Really healthy genotype here. So based on this whole panel for cardiovascular disease panel, it looks like he's got a predisposition to lower odds of cardiovascular issues, which is really good to see. Um, he was scoring high for epilepsy, so if you take this stuff into account, and there's two other genotypes that go into the calculation for epilepsy, I think. So let's see the S&P count for epilepsy. Hold on, I think it was 6 in this file. Epilepsy. No, it was 4 in this file. So in this case, it's the 4 that show up on the screen. So he's scoring slightly above average for the odds of epilepsy, and so it's based on these 4 S&Ps. He's got slightly above average odds for epilepsy. All right. For facial morphology panel, this definitely will be very interesting to see. He's got European genotype in this variation of EDAR, European genotype in this variation of EDAR, but he's got partial European genotype in this variation of EDAR. So he's got only one European EDAR allele. He's got heterozygous genotype here. So this is kind of unusual for Europeans to score this, but it looks like this Western hunter-gatherer has got heterozygous genotype here. And I noticed that among Western hunter-gatherers, heterozygous genotype in EDAR is very common. Western hunter-gatherers, European hunter-gatherers in general, heterozygous genotype in the EDAR seems to be quite common. It looks like there was some kind of selection among Europeans to select for like European variants in EDAR and against the Asiatic variants in EDAR. I'm not sure why that is. He's got higher odds of protruding nasal bridge. He's got longer mid-face length. He's got larger nose size, thicker eyebrows, and a genotype for intermediate eyebrow thickness. He's got lower odds of missing teeth, and he's got nose drooping down. All right. No micropenis, which is really good to see. He's got likely more sprinter than an endurance athlete. Quite good to see. One fat gene variant, NFTOs, RS9939609, high odds of obesity and sleep apnea. He likely has photic sneeze reflex. He has no variants for increased pen sensitivity. And he has not an Asian flusher, lower odds of alcoholism, normal risk of esophageal cancer. Okay, no risk variance for pain hypersensitivity out of 10 total in SCN9A, which is really good to see. And I'm curious, is there a genotype for ACT1 for cannabis-induced psychosis? Yes, there is. Greater odds of cannabis-induced psychosis based on a genotype in ACT1. Definitely quite interesting. Sex hormone, I'm not going to talk about that. For albinism and the typical traits panel, which looks like he does not carry any risk variance for albinism, not albino whatsoever. For familiar Mediterranean fever, no risk variance for familiar Mediterranean fever whatsoever. MTHFR panel looks like it does not have any risk variance for increased homocysteine levels, which is really good to see. Cancers, he's got one risk variant for breast cancer right here, and absolutely no risk variance for testicular cancer whatsoever. So he's quite protected. He is really protected from testicular cancer. Wow. So this person has a lot of protections from testicular cancer. That's really good. Really, really good. Let's see the okay. Let's see the rare diseases and traits panel. Does he have any predisposition to any rare diseases? He's got a genotype that leads to a higher odds of exfoliation glaucoma. He's got a genotype that leads to, let's see what else. Carrier of pseudosulfate A deficiency allele, which is very interesting. But I'm not seeing anything else. No other rare conditions. Okay. And for celiac disease, no risk variance in HLA. Actually, there is one risk allele in this variation of HLA DRB1 star 0301. Okay. For kidney stone, looks like there's a lot of risk variance. Let's see the polygenic risk score. I forgot the polygenic risk score for kidney stones. Let's scroll up and see. Looks like he's got below average odds for kidney stones. All right. And okay, for androgen receptor, he's got higher odds of baldness, which is quite typical for Europeans to score. Canavan syndrome, no risk variance for Canavan syndrome. Crohn disease, no risk guidance for Crohn disease, quite typical stuff. HIV and AIDS panel, he's got genotype for reduced HIV viral load, which is really good to see. For HLA gene panel, as I was saying, he's got lower odds of autoimmune disease, which is really good to see. I missed the vitiligo panel. Hold on, vitiligo panel. Let's see. Yes, so he does actually have a risk variance for vitiligo in the HLA gene, and this is why he's scoring so high for so relatively high for the highest odds of autoimmune disease. 11% is pretty high. Like if you don't have any risk variance, you typically will score like 2 to 3%. So it's actually kind of high that he's scoring 11% for highest odds of autoimmune disease, but it's also not that much. So it's not that big of a deal. For MTRR gene panel, looks like he's got 2 risk variants for disorders of intracellular collagen metabolism and nothing for anything else. 1 risk allele for in this variation for disorders of intracellular collagen metabolism. For homocystinuria and elevated homocysteine levels, looks like he has a predisposition to intermediate levels of homocysteine. Slight predisposition to lower homocysteine levels, actually, because the percentage for lower is so much higher than the percentage for elevated, which is really good to see. For muscular dystrophy myopathies, looks like he has no risk variance for that whatsoever, no risk variance for ADL either, which is really good to see. Color blindness panel, he's got 1 risk variance for color blindness and OPN1SW, but I notice it's quite common and I see people with that all the time, so it's not that big of a deal. FTO gene panel, no risk variance for obesity here, no risk variance here, but he does have heterozygous genotype in this variation, heterozygous here, and heterozygous here, and heterozygous here. So he's heterozygous for obesity in 4 variations, and he's got no risk variance for obesity in 2. So there is like 66 percent odds for highest odds for slight intermediate odds of obesity, and 33% odds for no odds for obesity whatsoever. So there is slight predisposition to obesity, I'd say. Then there's other genotypes within PFKP gene, which is not FTO, for lower odds for obesity, slightly higher. Actually, no, slightly higher BMI, so slightly higher odds of obesity. And other genotypes that are not implicated in that are not in FTO but also implicated in obesity, which lead to lower odds of obesity. This one looks like lower odds of obesity as well, and this one is for lower odds of obesity as well. So overall, I'd say just based on this stuff, based on information that I'm seeing here, looks like he is not really predisposed to obesity. For syncope panel based on these 3 SNPs that are found in the file, looks like he has a low predisposition to syncope, below average predisposition to syncope. Biotraits panel, AA here, which leads to decreased MTR activity and increased homocysteine levels, but this does not contribute to the homocysteine panel score. Looks like he has where's CTLCL1? 2 copies of the hunter-gatherer CLTCL1 gene variant, which leads to reduced ability to process carbs and sugars. Very interesting that he is actually also a hunter-gatherer by his lifestyle. So he's living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and he also has a reduced ability to process carbs and sugars, which definitely very lucky for him that he has this gene variant, which leads to reduced ability to process carbs and sugars when he is also a hunter-gatherer. If he was a farmer and he had this gene variant, it would be very unfortunate. He is more able to detect beta-iodine floral fragrance, which is really cool. Let's move on to the vitamins and levels. He's got a genotype for lower levels of vitamin D, intermediate levels of vitamin D, and slightly higher LDL cholesterol. Increased blood pressure, lower blood cell count. I'm just going through the stuff that's marked with warnings. Decreased protection of neurons against glutamate toxicity, decreased rate of glutamate degradation, and genotype for lower levels of B12, genotype for lower levels of B6, genotype for lower levels of vitamin A, genotypes for lower levels of vitamin E, and the genotype for lower levels of vitamin K. Okay, and for blood group, let's see what blood type he most likely has based on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Based on these 9 SNPs, he most likely has blood type O, and it's quite a precise prediction. I mean, I wouldn't really take. He's technically scoring 7% for type A, and it's quite significant. Like in statistics, if a number is above 5%, you consider it significant, but let's be honest here. I don't really consider 7% significant. So he's definitely type O for blood type. So he's got blood type O, and yeah, I mean it's a pretty precise prediction right here. So he's got blood type O, and that's the result for La Braña 1 from Spain, Mesolithic individual from Spain. Thanks for watching my video until the very end. I want to remind you that you can download the sample that I was analyzing in this video, as well as every other sample that I analyze in all my videos in 23andMe format from link which is in the description of the video. In the description of the video, you will also find the link to buy the executable for my trade predictor. The trade predictor is the tool that I use to generate all of these health and traits reports for all of these files that I analyze. It is a tool that I developed myself, and it works with any microarray sequence file. So if you have a MyHeritage, Ancestry, or 23andMe file, trade predictor will work with it. Um, in case you don't have a Windows or a Linux system, or you don't have a virtual machine that can run a Windows or a Linux executable file, that's okay. In that case, there is also going to be a link in the description of the video where you can upload your raw DNA file, and I will run your raw DNA file through my trade predictor for you, and I will give you your result. I will send it to you by email, and that will cost you very cheap. It will cost you $4 for one sample or $7 for two samples. So also make sure you check that out. That will also be in the description of the video. The link to that service will be there as well. Thanks for watching. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy my content, and goodbye.